Hello, I'm Jill Tiefenthaler, CEO of the National Geographic Society and a proud Duke alumna. While I couldn't join you in person, it brings me great joy to address members of the Duke community, especially in celebration of our centennial. I went to Duke to get a PhD with hopes of an academic career teaching economics. Back then, I never imagined I would become a college president, much less the leader of the National Geographic Society. But looking back, it's clear that so many of my experiences and choices at Duke prepared me for these roles. I spent 4 transformative years walking Duke's halls and, of course, strolling the gardens. The Social Sciences building houses the economics department and is right next to the gardens, and I spent many lunch hours and afternoon breaks in the Sarah Duke Gardens. I know you know, in the spring, it is stunning. When not taking breaks, I was being trained to be an economist by an incredibly talented faculty. But in addition to receiving a rigorous economic education that prepared me for my early life as a professor, I continued to hone my liberal arts skills, writing, critical thinking, comfort with ambiguity, and these skills helped me to be nimble and adaptable as new opportunities arose. And I can't forget one of the most important things I got at Duke, my husband. He was a fellow graduate student in economics. We married right after graduation and shared 30-year careers in higher education. And now I'm on a new adventure at National Geographic. Like Duke, the Society shares my values: a commitment to mission, excellence, transformative education, and a dedication to meaningful change and significant impact. We drive impact by funding a global community of National Geographic explorers, scientists, conservationists, educators, storytellers, and other change makers who illuminate and protect the wonder of our world. I'm thrilled for you to hear from 3 members of our Nat Geo community this evening, including 2 explorers. Catherine, Frank, and Shannon, we commend your unwavering commitment to planetary stewardship and are thrilled for others to hear more about your work. It's change makers like you and communities like Duke Nature that make me optimistic about our planet's future. Together, we can make a difference. Enjoy the evening, and go Blue Devils.
Good evening, and a warm welcome to Granger Hall, home of the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University. I'm Gabriel Campos, a proud graduate here at the Nicholas School, focusing on ecosystem science and conservation. We are currently amidst a truly special period in our campus's history. The Duke Centennial is a call to reflect on 100 years of community, service, and academic excellence. It is this period of reflection that has motivated students to ensure the recognition of nature and environment within the broader centennial celebration. Duke Nature is the culmination of this vision. Duke Nature is a collaboration that spreads across our university, from Durham to our Marine Lab in Beaufort, and even to our Kunshan campus in China. Students, faculty, and staff from diverse disciplines designed and implemented the Centennial program. From an archive exploration with Rubenstein Libraries to on-campus nature excursions led by our community leaders, from environmental art galleries to a music and arts festival, which is tomorrow at the Duke Gardens. All of y'all should come 1 to 4 p.m. This evening, we celebrate 3 distinguished Duke alum who are true changemakers of the world. Our speakers have dedicated their lives to preserving Earth's ecological and cultural diversity. They are diverse in their backgrounds, talents, and the ways they apply their skills for the betterment of our planet. Despite these differences, they came to Duke with a common mission. And today, in part of their experiences at Duke, they stand as global leaders, tackling the world's most pressing environmental issues. With a combined 42 years of experience at National Geographic, our speakers tonight have made and continue to leave their mark, influencing scientific communication on global audiences. They have traveled distances to be here with us this evening, and I'm so excited for you to hear from them tonight. Now, without further ado, let's get this show started. Our first guest graced these very halls from 2013 to 2015, when she received her master's from the Nicholas School, studying coastal and environmental management. Her work combines anthropology, psychology, and ecology to address today's most pressing marine conservation issues. She has had an illustrious 15-year career at National Geographic as an explorer and is currently an assistant professor of environmental studies at Cal State San Marcos. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to welcome back Shannon Switzer Swanson. Shannon, how is it to be back in Duke?
Oh my gosh, it's so wonderful. This is such a treat. My second year here, my last of the masters, this building opened up. And so I got to host a few events here, and it's just really great to be back and be here with you all. It's a real treat.
Awesome. Before we get started getting into your career and your talents, I want for the audience to hear from you, who is Shannon Switzer Swanson?
We first asked each of us this on our call, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is deep. I think first and foremost a storyteller, and prior to coming back to school, I worked full-time as a freelance photojournalist, but all of the various endeavors that I've pursued since then have all really involved storytelling when I reflect on them, including my research and my current work as an educator. So yeah, that's first and foremost. The other is a water woman, for lack of a better term, but just I'm most alive and thriving and connected when I'm in, on, or around, or talking about the ocean, and just love working with communities that are really connected to the ocean as well, and understanding that connection. That drives a lot of my research and my teaching. And yeah, just someone that wants to contribute back in some small way. I know probably all of you can relate to that, being part of the master's program in environment, and whatever other roles you have here at the university. But that's always been a really important part of my work and wanting to do that.
Well, I love how you call yourself a water woman. I think that word is incredible. But can you share what sparked that initial love and passion for the ocean for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in San Diego, in Southern California. I grew up going out on a very small little 21-foot sailboat called Grateful, that's the name of it, with my dad. And that was, I lived in coastal San Diego, but I was a little bit inland, and actually where I found that connection was out at Catalina Island, which is just off of Southern California. So we go out there every summer. And I was reflecting on this recently. I think we didn't do anything in particular. We just went out there, we anchored the boat at a little place called Emerald Bay. And I just spent time. I just spent time in the water, diving, snorkeling, looking at the Garibaldi and the sea lions, and just listening to the ocean. And it was just very quiet and peaceful. And I think just spending time being out there really bred that kind of connection and wanting to spend more time here.
Awesome. Thank you. You were granted your first National Geographic grant as a young explorer, and you studied marine pollution in your hometown in San Diego. Can you describe how that came out to be? What was your call to action for that?
Yeah, so it's funny because my first grant with National Geographic was related to surfing. And you might assume that since I grew up in San Diego, I had surfed my whole life, but I didn't actually start surfing until I was in college. I was at UC Santa Barbara. And that became, a really amazing way to connect with the ocean, spend time in the ocean, and other people love the ocean. And that eventually led to my first project with National Geographic, which was prompted by my now husband, actually, and several other friends who had life-threatening bacterial infections that they got from surfing in polluted water along the San Diego and Orange County coastline. And so I wanted to better understand that. It was an interesting timing when all this happened, because I had spent a lot of time traveling globally, doing photojournalism work. I had sailed from San Diego down to Costa Rica. I had worked with researchers who were studying chimpanzees in Uganda, whale sharks in the Seychelles. So I've been all over the place, but I really felt like it was time to reconnect with where I was from, and pursue a story, closer to home, and that was really personal to me, and better understand the systems where I grew up and how they're all connected, and impact, how that connection between coastal health and human health. So I applied for the grant to look at that, got connected with Catherine eventually, And just it's been an amazing a relationship to continue on building with National Geographic from that one little grant. It was $2,500. It was not a large grant, so but it gave me, that inroad to build that relationship. Yeah.
Well, you are such a water woman, and it's quite evident, through your work that you are attached and have this deep personal connection with the ocean. But can you bring up a time that you were, quite far and distant from the ocean? I know that you mentioned Uganda, so can you touch on what that was like for you to, be that far away from the ocean?
Yeah. It was sort of a random opportunity to be able to go work with a PhD student in Uganda studying chimpanzees. And that really was where I had felt the most out of my element. I remember kind of tripping through the forest and getting tangled in roots and getting poked by, these plants that didn't like me, and just feeling like I was totally out of place and did not belong in this ecosystem. And that I remember just feeling like at the end of that year, my gills were drying out. That's what I felt. And so ever since I've stuck closer to the watering part of our planet. But it was a really amazing opportunity as well. But really cemented my love for and just feeling at home in the ocean.
Awesome. What have you learned about the world of scientific storytelling through all of your experiences at National Geographic?
Yes, I can do this question too. This is a good one. And there's so much to unpack there. But I think the primary thing I've learned is that storytelling can come in so many different formats. And I think through working with National Geographic and all the incredible explorers there that have brought their own unique, perspectives, backgrounds, skill sets, interests, and just come up with these really creative ways of sharing these compelling stories, and just all the unique insights that can be brought through different mediums. So I think just the expansiveness that that storytelling has, and the opportunity that it presents to connect, the broader public, or people not necessarily focused on wanting to, protect the environment, to bring them in pathway with that and to bring them into connection with that. So it's exciting because I've done work with National Geographic that's ranged from working with a cartoonist to develop, a cartoon about walking the watershed in San Diego. All the way to producing my own short films on the aquarium trade and the global trade and how that's impacted in that global supply chain. And then also my most recent project was actually hosting a TV documentary on water conservation in the West. So there's just so many different ways to bring that information to the broader world.
Thank you. So now let's get into Duke. You started your career at National Geographic in 2009, but you got to Duke in 2013, and you had developed this, conservation, storytelling skill set through your various experiences. So what are some pivotal lessons that you got from Duke that you added to your skill set?
Oh my gosh, so many. When I arrived at Duke, I had been out of school for about 7 years, so it was a little bit of a shock to the system. I remember I didn't bring a notebook or pens or anything, or a laptop. First day of class, I just totally forgot what it was about. So that took a little bit, but to get back in gear. But then just being here at Duke opened up my eyes to a whole world of different topics, but also different methods for research that I didn't even know existed. So I was able to, I'd always thought I had to be a super quantitative, analytical in that way person. And through the courses here with Charlotte Clark, I don't know if any of you have had the chance to work with her, she's amazing, teaching qualitative methods. Lisa Campbell, who's at the Marine Lab, and did introduce me to visual participatory methods through the community voice method and working with, in participatory ways with communities. To Javier Basurto, who introduced me really to community-based fisheries work. I think he's here today. And Liz Shapiro, who also really introduced me to local work with organizations and community-based approaches to research. And so it was just, and it really allowed a collision of my past work as a photojournalist, and I really saw how that could be synergistic with being a researcher and working with communities around conservation. So it was eye-opening. It was truly transformative. Like I can't state that enough. It was, yeah, it's very grateful.
Well, the Nicholas School is currently investing in community-based environmental management as a new curriculum here at the Nicholas School. So I was able to take a CBEM course, which was amazing. My mind was completely open to the importance of including community in this type of work. So can you discuss a little more in depth of what qualitative participatory methods are for people that may not know exactly what those are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of work with coastal fishing communities, and part of that work, to me, what's the most important about that is really trying to understand what's meaningful to those communities, those residents, those that are really most closely connected to the resources that I've always been drawn to, and really depend, for their livelihoods on those resources. And so it was quickly apparent to me as I was thinking through and meeting other scholars that work in this space that there needs to be room for those. Historically, research has been more one-sided as far as a researcher coming in and saying, this is my research question, this is what I want to learn more about. And the participants have been just party to that, but not having control or agency over that. And so participatory methods really try to flip that power dynamic and say, hey, like these are not these people that are investing their time and energy and sharing their knowledge with you, like they need to be also leading and driving what the questions are, right? And that reflects what's important and meaningful to them. And so participatory methods are an imperfect but evolving way to do that. And then being able to use, so I term them visual participatory methods, but that's like community film, community photography, putting cameras in the hands of residents and participants to tell their own stories and to share what's most meaningful to them. So that it's a really nice way to open dialogue around different topics, and not just within that community, but also often other overlapping or intersecting communities or stakeholders that have very different perspectives on a particular topic. It can be a really nice mediation tool. There's lots of different ways that it's really important for this kind of work.
In engaging communities in this way, I'd imagine that you develop some sort of really deep personal relationship with these communities. So can you touch on how those communities have impacted you in your personal life?
Yes, okay. I'm thinking of so many people right now as we're talking. So I lived for over a year with fishing communities in Central Sulawesi, Indonesia. And I think, honestly, what they've taught me was to have more accountability for my own day-to-day actions and thinking through, I was traveling across the world to study how they were using their reefs, right? And perhaps I was looking partially at destructive practices that were being used in the region. But really they taught me to hold up the mirror to myself, and rather than as an external researcher coming and saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. Really like looking at my own practices to understand, how I can make a change in my own cultural system. And that's still manifesting, still trying to always every day figure that out and how to make inroads again, working to reduce climate change and whatnot. But they really, working with them really helped me to reflect more deeply on that. And then the other thing I would say was they really taught me to see beauty in everything, because they were making their lives beautiful often in really challenging circumstances, and with minimal resources, and they were still just making their lives beautiful in so many different ways. And I was just really honored to be able to spend some time around that.
Thank you. I want to get back to National Geographic and talk about the collaborative grant that you were given to study the reef to aquarium, the exotic fish trade. You were given and your team one of the first collaborative grants. Can you touch in on that experience for you?
Yeah, it was the first collaborative grant. It's fun. I forgot about That was a really great experience working with the team. We were trying to find out where it was. So the impetus for the project was when Finding Dory came out. So it would be the follow-up to Finding Nemo. And there was this big concern that the blue tang would be over-harvested because of the popularity of that species from the movie. So we were trying to figure out if that was going to be true. Also, we were trying to figure out where most of them came from, and we found out that we realized after doing very, initial research that they primarily come from Southeast Asia, from the Philippines and Indonesia, and that's what ended up bringing me and my team out there. And it was cool because on our team we had a hobbyist, so someone that had actually grown up in Colorado but collected aquarium fish, and that had been his touch point with marine biology, even though he grew up in the center of our country. And so he, there was this perspective from his side of why hobbyists and keeping aquarium fish might be an important educational tool. But then we also had people who worked on coral reefs that were like, well, maybe we should be keeping the fish on the reef, right? But the overall objective of that was then was to figure out that supply chain, figure out how it can be made more sustainable. Because one of the concerns is they use cyanide often to catch, especially blue tang, because they're very shy and like hiding in little coral crevices. And to try to understand more sustainable methods for that. But it did really end up leading me to my dissertation work, which was slightly different and was really an incredible insight into the livelihoods and kind of the economic side of how the fishers think about collecting these aquarium fish.
Awesome. We have time for one more question. And I'm interested in your current role as a assistant professor at Cal State San Marcos. Obviously, you have your own ambitions and goals, things you want to continue to accomplish. But now you have students as well that they have their own ambitions and their own goals. So how do you balance these two?
Yeah, I'm still figuring that out. It's my end of my second year, and still I'm very much feel like I'm getting my sea legs with teaching. But it's been a real pleasure to get to know a lot of the students there that I have so far. And it's been interesting because I was sharing earlier with some colleagues. I did my undergrad at a public university at UC Santa Barbara, but then I've been at Duke and Stanford, which are very elite private universities with incredible resources and funding. So it's been interesting to return to San Marcos, which is actually where I grew up in San Diego, and now teach at the Cal State there. And we were last year named #1 in social mobility. So I'm working with a lot of first generation students and students from like historically underrepresented groups in higher education. And they're working 2 or 3 jobs or supporting family members. So I think so far my experience has just been figuring out how to best, support them in and really trying to understand what their goals are for the degree that they're getting. And so partially, sometimes that's bringing them into my research as much as I have been able to so far, but sometimes it's actually just thinking through like what internship locally would be super helpful for them, or what local connection. A lot of them go into local government or local sort of positions, and so trying to rebuild my network in San Diego also, and make sure I can best serve that student body. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's give it up for Shannon in the room. Before I get into the next guest, I did fail to mention the format, the way that we're going to be doing this. So each speaker will have 20 minutes on stage with me where I have curated questions. And then at the end, we'll open it up for audience Q&A around 15 to 20 minutes. So that was Shannon, everyone. And now we'll get into our next speaker. Our next guest has more than 15 years of experience in the strategic planning, research, impact evaluation, and communication of biodiversity conservation, combating wildlife crime, and global grant making. In 2010, she graduated from Duke with a PhD in anthropology. After finishing her degree, she started at Denver Zoo before moving to Nat Geo for the majority of her career, eventually becoming VP of Science. She also spent a year at USAID as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. Now, she's a head of programs at Adventure Scientists, an NGO that mobilizes and trains outdoor enthusiasts and communities to collect high-quality scientific data for conservation. It is a great honor to invite Catherine Workman to the stage. Catherine, how are you?
That was such a delightful conversation to get to listen to. So I was Shannon's program officer, 1,000 years ago, when she got her grant, and you were just so special then, and you're such a light to listen to. So it was a wonderful conversation, a great kickoff.
Great.
Yeah, real joy.
Awesome. And you were just at Duke last week.
Yes.
What were you here for?
Yes. So one of my dissertation committee members retired after just a phenomenal career. There was a full day symposium, Rich K, in evolutionary anthropology, and so my undergrad and master's advisor was his PhD student. Rich was also my dissertation committee along with my undergrad and master's advisor. So all these people, like these impactful, meaningful people from my career and life, all gathered to listen and salute and pay tribute to Rich's incredible legacy. And then we all went to the Lemur Center for a reception, and we had the red-ruffed lemurs just shrieking at us all. It was wonderful. Such a special, really a special time to be here. Yeah, thanks for letting me say that.
Of course, thank you. So we'll get started a similar way we did with Shannon. I'm going to ask you, who is Catherine Workman?
I'm human. I'm an anthropologist by training. I'm a conservationist. I'm a mother. I'm a vegan. I'm someone who cares a lot about the natural world, about doing my part. I love that Shannon and I, obviously, like everyone in the room, I'm doing my part to contribute to the sustainability and livability of life on this planet for my son, for children around the globe, their health and the well-being of other non-human creatures too. So that vibrant tapestry of life that we have on the planet, I care very much about doing my part to sustain it. And I also am just somebody who sits with a lot of gratitude, like sitting here, having this conversation, looking out this beautiful campus. You talked about what an elite university this is, like the opportunity to be here, to go and get a PhD here, live around the world, collect data on rare endangered creatures, and then to get to share that with people that I've mentored, people who are on my team, people who are earlier in their career and thinking about what decisions they're making. Like there's, I've worked hard and I've said yes to opportunity, but there's just so much luck and timing and meeting great people that's involved in that. So I just feel very, very grateful for all of it up to this point, including this moment with you.
I really appreciate that. I appreciate this moment as well with you and with everyone else that's here as well.
He's a good host.
What made you want to pursue a PhD at Duke?
Yeah, I think if anyone's going into a PhD program, Ken Glander, like for me, is the advisor, 100% the advisor. That relationship is so special. It's so important. It is, that person, in the best of cases, is your mentor, your advocate, your colleague, your peer, your friend, almost a family member. And so for me, when I first started, I was at University of Colorado Boulder finishing a master's, and my advisor had gone to Burt Covert, had gone and done his PhD there. So I already had good things to do. I'm a huge basketball fan, didn't hurt. But when I started reaching out to PhD programs, and I had a conversation with Ken, and Ken is just so curious about the world and supportive of students and their ability to ask questions about the world. So it wasn't, this is my research program and here's some questions that you could pursue, but it was, what are you interested in, Catherine? What do you want to do? And then I very much upfront told him that I didn't want to stay in academia, that I wanted to move into applying my degree in some way. I thought it would be in an NGO, but I didn't know at the time. And he was fully supportive of that and said, I'll help you get a job. So like just that initially the supportive, just such a kind and humane human being. So it had tons to do with Ken Glander. And then, of course, the resources that Shannon mentioned. I mean, being able to go through your program without debt and having the ability to get that paid for, it's an incredible opportunity that had a lot to do with it. And then I'm a Tennessee girl. And so being able to spend 4, because 2 of them were in Vietnam, it's 4 beautiful years in this part of the country. It like fills my soul up to get to be in Duke Forest, to get to be at the Lemur Center. So it was just personally and professionally, this was the right place for me, but very much had to do with that advisor relationship.
Thank you. You studied the critically endangered Delacour's langur in Vietnam for your PhD. I'm curious, well, one, can you share with us what that experience was like to be in Vietnam, studying this remarkable species? And 2, what did you learn about conservation science through this experience?
Yep.
Has anyone in this room heard the Delacruz liner? Yeah. Okay. In the back. So Delacruz liner is Trachypithecus delacruri is the scientific name. They're a group of liners that are called the limestone liners because they're found almost exclusively on limestone karst habitat. Delacruz liners are restricted to northern Vietnam. They're endemic to the country and to limestone karst in the northern part of the country. So as an undergraduate, I had the opportunity to go to Vietnam and help out my advisor collecting some data. And that led to developing relationships with Vietnamese colleagues, Vietnamese friends, really just falling in love with everything about my first trip there, and knowing that because of the history of the country and the history of America and Vietnam, we had normalized relations with Vietnam until the 90s, until the Clinton administration. So there just hadn't been much work done by American scientists in Vietnam. And so it was the opportunity to grow relationships and to contribute to basic natural history at the time. Some of the primatology that was being done elsewhere was much more sophisticated, the types of questions that people were able to ask because that base of knowledge was so much deeper. And the opportunity in Vietnam was really to start to ask exploratory questions about adaptation, about ecology, about relationship with animals and their environment. And that was extremely exciting to me. And on top of that, Vietnam happens to host a large majority of threatened primates, in part again because of the history of war in the country, but also because it sits as a nexus of both demand, trafficking, and source for illegal wildlife trade. So the species that I study is they're used both for food and medicine in Vietnam and in China. And so there's just this nexus of like the opportunity for research and also the ability to contribute to conservation by working there. And so that's why that was such an attractive opportunity for me. What did I learn about conservation science there? I mean, I learned tons. About conservation, I think one of the most important things I learned working in Vietnam versus other places was that conservation is so place-based. And so it's not just the ecology and the biology, it's economics, it's the policy, it's the laws, it's the history. So again, the history of a war-torn country, from the French, from the Americans, how that changes what is known about individual species, what's known about the natural history of species, the relationships. So German scientists, Russian scientists, French scientists, who's working with Vietnamese scientists, the ability for Vietnamese scientists to get an education in anthropology, like all of these things factor into the conservation of that particular place and those particular animals in that environment. And so for me, it was, I mean, obviously conservation is complicated. I learned that, but also just the importance of understanding all of those other factors, that it's not simply about asking questions, testing hypotheses and collecting ecological and biological data, but it's understanding all the rest of it too. And then Shannon so beautifully talked about the importance of human relationships, centering humans in conservation, not just partnering and collaborating, but really, I think Shannon said it the best in thinking about what are the people living in and around the habitat, what are their interests, what are their motivations, what are my motivations for being there. So I learned all that living in Vietnam. I learned a new language, learned a new culture. Yeah, it was truly, Shannon again said that we're transformative, and I think that's really true. For me, I learned conservation science. I could have my highest highs and my lowest lows in conservation. What does that look like? What does it look like to see an animal who's been trafficked? What does it look like to see an animal, scramble across the cliffs at night to go to its sleeping ledge, one of 200 that are alive in the wild, 9 meters away? It's like just highs and lows. Yeah, it was a phenomenal experience, and I maintained those relationships with the humans to this day. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the liners in a long time.
Sounds like an incredible experience.
Yeah.
And it was through this research that you've done that you applied for your first National Geographic grant.
That's right.
And this kind of kicked off your relationship with National Geographic.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share this experience with the audience?
Yes, and I'll try to be briefer.
You're okay.
Yes, so National Geographic was one of the funders of my dissertation work. They funded my soil analysis. And it just so happened that the Committee for Research and Exploration, which was the grant advisory body that evaluated my grant and decided on my grant, every year they went to a different place to visit grantees. And in 2007, 2008, when I was living in Vietnam, they came to Vietnam and Cambodia. So I had the opportunity to take those illustrious scientists out in a little bamboo boat in the wetland nature reserve where I worked. And they pushed themselves across and they got to see, these rare species dart across the limestone cliffs before the sun went down. And so I kept in touch. I mean, the point of this is good relationships, to keep in touch with people. I kept in touch with my program officer, kept in touch with the committee members and the staff at National Geographic. And so when I graduated from Duke and went to Denver Zoo to work in the conservation biology department, my program officer at National Geographic knew that I was interested in NGOs and really interested probably in NGOs in Washington, D.C. And so when he left this job, he reached out and said, I'm leaving, you should apply for this job. And so I did. Ended up going to National Geographic in the beginning as a program officer and evaluating all of the biology, ecology, conservation, basically he said the living sciences. I had a colleague who covered all the dirt sciences, archaeology and paleontology, geology. And so that's what started the relationship, but was in as a program officer. But I think it's so important. I mean, for me, I've been, again, I would say so lucky in my career, but a lot of it's maintaining relationships. Whether it's at Duke or whether it's first at National Geographic, you just never know where a relationship's going to lead and who's going to know somebody else if it's somebody else's place. And so just staying in good relationships is definitely what led to me first getting an opportunity at National Geographic.
Thank you. I would love to talk more about National Geographic. And I wanted to ask the question about, if there are people in the room that had any ideas that they would like to apply for National Geographic grant, what would that be? But I do want to get into adventure scientists, and I know that you'll be available after and have to be able to have this conversation with students as well.
Sure, I can say something about
sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I do think it's important, and Shannon and I were talking earlier about the grants. There's currently, so the grant making at National Geographic has changed a little bit, but I would say high level for grants, any grant you're applying for, read the criteria, read the eligibility criteria, read the project criteria, read the budget, read everything very, very closely. Read the FAQs on the website very closely. And then when you go to submit, see if there's a contact person at the grant. Is there a program officer that you can ask? Some program officers will go over your project topic with you. Some won't because they don't have the bandwidth or conflict of interest, but oftentimes they will. So reach out, be bold. And then also before you submit, have somebody review it, edit it as an editing eye, and also don't get too technical. A lot of these grants are reviewed by people with broad knowledge and broad expertise, but not narrowly on the method that you're going to be deploying. So really think about a smart, informed reader evaluating your grant, and even do like I think it's called like the aunt test or the mother test, like for someone who's well informed, they understand what your idea is. Yeah, and reach out to me afterwards too. I'm happy to put you in touch with the National Geographic or other places.
And you recently transitioned out of National Geographic and are now head of programs at Adventure Scientists. Can you talk briefly about Adventure Scientists and your role?
Yes. So Adventure Scientists is an environmental NGO. They're based in Bozeman, but we have a distributed workforce. So we have some people in Montana, some in Argentina. I live in Washington, D.C., along with our head of strategic partnerships. What we do is we have conservation partners, and with them, we help them collect data for conservation solutions. So partners in government, academia, NGOs have a challenge they're trying to address, and they're limited by data, field data. And what we do is we mobilize, we recruit, and we train community scientists, participant scientists, volunteer scientists, citizen scientists. It has a lot of names, so I don't want to, I want to be all encompassing there, to help collect data at scale. So it could be, the whole range of black walnut in the United States. It could be multiple countries in Latin America for coral reefs. And the real differentiator about the organization is that we appeal to outdoor enthusiasts. That's who we're trying to bring in. So some of our projects, you need to be quite technical in your outdoor skills. Maybe it's kayaking, scuba diving, rock climbing. And then we also have projects that are much more accessible and inclusive to folks who just like to go for walks or hikes in their neighborhood or in national parks. And there, the data collection, the training is not quite, the protocols are not quite as intense, but it allows a broader group of people to contribute to conservation solutions. And so I'm the head of programs, so I lead the team that develops the partnerships and the projects, designs the technical work, and then mobilizes and trains and manages the volunteers on those projects.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Catherine. This was great, and we do have to move on to the next speaker, but it was a thrill to have you here, and we're all so lucky.
Thank you very much.
We're getting into our final speaker. Our final guest has over 30 years of experience in digital media, mapping, conservation, and sustainable travel. He graduated with a Master of Arts in Environment here at the Nicholas School in 2006. The first phase of his career was with the Nature Conservancy, developing GIS projects, data and capacity across, developing GIS projects, data and capacity across the organization for 14 years. During his 16-year career at National Geographic, he oversaw the creation, production, and marketing of websites, apps, and maps for consumer audiences. He is now working on a new digital consumer platform called Go Good for sustainable travel. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Biasi. Frank, how are you?
Doing pretty well.
That's all. I think it was there we go. There we go.
Right. I'm doing pretty well. I'm a little bit tired. I was in Stockholm about 30 hours ago for a conference and had to fly back to Denver first before coming back here, but I'm doing okay.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. But again, I'm going to ask you the same questions that I've asked Shannon and Catherine. Who is Frank in your own words?
Right. Well, I guess I'd say I'm a father first. I'm a conservationist, a traveler, explorer with a small E, and a geographer, a conservation geographer. But I would say most of my work has been focused on creating maps and apps and websites for conservation and then sustainable economic development.
Something that you didn't know in that is that you're a chief executive officer of a new not-for-profit that you're starting yourself.
That's right.
And it's called Go Good. So can you please talk about Go Good?
Sure. Yes. So yeah, I'm still working on my marketing skills. Yeah, no, Go Good. I'm so excited to be working on this new platform. It's based on a lot of work that I did at National Geographic, and it's basically a digital atlas and travel guide for sustainable travel. So you can sort of imagine Google Earth meets National Geographic, and it's meant to help thoughtful travelers, conscious, responsible travelers, learn about the world and discover and explore and actually help to sustain treasured places around the world.
Awesome. You mentioned sustainable travel.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So sustainable travel is travel that actually has a positive impact on the places that we visit, and that benefits the local communities, that doesn't degrade the environment or the culture of the places. It's kind of a model for tourism and travel that differs from a lot of the travel, the mass tourism that we see, that where you get a lot of people going, a lot of travelers, tourists going to the same place at the same time, and doing travel that doesn't really support the local community and degrades it. So yeah, sustainable travel it's taking that huge economic engine of travel, which represents about 10% of world GDP, travel and tourism, around 8% of carbon emissions as well, it's not travel. And it tries to make that impact, all of that economic activity actually benefit the place and reduce the negative impacts.
Do you have any specific case studies that interest you in this regard, where there's a space or a place in the world that is being degraded because of unthoughtful travelers?
Yeah, well, I've done work in UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which include both natural sites like national parks, Grand Canyon and Yosemite, and as well as cultural sites like Angkor Wat and places like that. So in the really popular ones, there really is just so much over tourism that happens there that it's and it's also that what you end up with are you get companies that go and develop tourism that are big corporations that basically acquire the land and build hotels and do these facilities in ways that are not in any way benefiting the local people, and they're basically just encouraging more and more people to come and sort of growth at all costs. And so, I mean, there are many examples of it, case studies around the world.
Thank you. Getting back to Sweden and your travels there, you were at the Global Sustainable Tourism Conference, of which Go Good is a member of the Global Sustainable Travel. What is it?
Yeah, it's the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, and it's a global organization that was initially funded by the UN Foundation to basically create criteria for what is sustainable travel. This conference, there were 500 delegates from 50 countries around the world who were all gathered to share strategies and techniques that businesses are using, and destinations, places, countries, cities, etc., are using to minimize the impact and of travel, and to help redo the model of travel in those places to actually benefit the local people, and to preserve the environment and ecosystems of the place. And so it was great to kind of hear all the work that's being done in all these places. We learned about the different issues of greenwashing that's taking place. That there are criteria and standards that are used, but there's also a lot of greenwashing where companies are saying they're doing things sustainably, but and marketing themselves that way, but it's not actually happening. And so we learned about the European Union actually has new regulations that is required, that is imposing big penalties now on companies, businesses, for making these inaccurate, fake, false claims about sustainable tourism in their operations. So, yeah.
Also, a huge part of this is collaboration with larger NGOs, but also collaboration with local communities and local organizations in these places that we're trying to preserve culture and biodiversity. And in your work at National Geographic, the Nature Conservancy, you collaborated with tons of people at all different kinds of scales. So can you share, how do you effectively collaborate?
Yeah, I think that some of the key things are to really empathize, to understand and listen to your collaborators, whoever they are, and try to empathize them, really try to understand what their goals are, and do what you can to really align whatever your goals are with theirs. And so I think trying to find that common ground with people, and try to look at whatever their situation is from their eyes, and then to make sure that whatever you're doing, your project or your program, really does benefit them in practical ways. Those are sort of the key things that you really have to do. And it can be complicated because you can often have different conflicting priorities and interests between different organizations. If you have a lot of stakeholders in an area, like we did a lot of geotourism projects, which was sort of National Geographic's take on sustainable tourism, which is looking at tourism holistically for a region and trying to define what's special about that place, and make sure that tourism sort of helps to sustain the geographic character and the environment and the culture and everything within the place. So it takes a lot of conversations and listening and being empathetic.
Thank you. You mentioned GeoStories as a project that you developed and worked on at National Geographic, and you talked about how a lot of what Go Good is were from concepts that you worked on at the Nature Conservancy and at National Geographic. So can you discuss any notable or special projects that you've worked on, either at the National Geographic or at the Nature Conservancy, that seeded your work now at Go Good?
Yeah, well, Jill, I did so many projects over the 16 years. A lot of them were co-branded with partner organizations. It was fun doing some print maps. I did a great map with Pat Halpin on the census of marine life, where we sort of took the results of this 10-year census and from all the different researchers across the globe and made a beautiful wall map, folded map. So that was a fun one, working with Pat and his team. But in terms of the digital platforms and projects, we did a project with the geotourism is probably the geotourism platform that we built to provide a sustainable travel guide for these regions around the world to support the geotourism program was one, and there are still several of those projects up and running. Another project was Landscape America, where we built actually a conservation atlas and encyclopedia for the U.S., bringing together conservation data from across these various agencies and NGOs across the U.S. and publishing that on a platform. It's landscape.org, so you can check that out still. And then the project that sort of led to Go Good was we did a lot of product R&D on this concept of a digital atlas and travel guide, and really found that there's a real need for this platform like this that travelers are lacking guidance on where to go and what to do when they travel. That there's we use about 36 different sources of information when we're planning our trips, and there's and then if you're looking for places that are sustainable and authentic and interesting, there's even less available. You have to put maps and websites and apps and magazines, etc.
Thank you. Pat, is that map on display at all at the Nicholas School?
Copies hanging up in the Marine Lab.
Oh, cool.
They close up that.
Well, that's incredible. Thank you. I want to get into your time at Duke, but before I do that, I think that you've had quite an interesting bachelor's experience at Clark University. You double majored in geography and studio art, and you were at Clark, where geographic information system was emerging, and this was a really good one for you to be. So can you touch on your experience double majoring with these two somewhat distant topics and GIS emerging there?
Yeah, so this was in the late 80s, and I planned to go into studio art, drawing and painting and that sort of thing, but wanted to get a liberal arts degree. So I went to Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and started a kind of a fine arts program. But then I had to fulfill a requirement and took a geography class and got completely hooked on geography. And so took several geography and classes, and then decided, found that Clark actually had a really good cartography department there. So took some mapping and thought, this is a great way to combine the geography and the art. And they also were one of the pioneers in GIS. And actually my advisor there, Ron Eastman, had developed one of the first GIS packages, Idrisi. And so I was able to take the first GIS course that they offered at Clark. This was again in the late 80s, and saw that this could be a real this would be a good career path to take. I saw that this technology was something that was really emerging and could be applied to so many different fields. And so yeah, I took the GIS classes and kind of learned the power of that, combining maps, digital maps with databases and with satellite and raster information, and then because of that, I was able to, because there were so few people who knew that technology back then, I was able to kind of get a job doing that right out of school, and then I was able to work at the Nature Conservancy, get a job at the Nature Conservancy, and work to do projects at all different scales with them, and build GIS capacity, and and that's when I crossed paths with Pat Halpin, who some of you I'm sure know, and came to, and Pat sort of recruited me to come to Duke here and start a PhD program. Because I hadn't really studied any science, though I'd been working with a lot of ecologists and biologists. Sorry. I really wanted to kind of learn more about conservation biology and landscape ecology. And I think you're getting into the Duke experience, right? I'm jumping into that already. Yeah, it was, and so we've been doing some interesting work at the Nature Conservancy and eco-regional planning space and creating these synthetic multi-purpose data sets like ecological land units, combining different layers of physical layers, combining slope, elevation aspects, and geology and soils as a surrogate for biodiversity. And then another synthetic data set was creating eco blocks, combining roads and coastlines and taking all that line work and putting it together to break up the landscape into conservation planning units. And so that was something that I wanted to further develop and was able to come here and work on that with Pat, and then really sort of get more of a foundation in conservation biology and landscape ecology, and kind of learn about the scientific methods and so yeah, and that's where I realized that. And it was great taking all the courses and everything, but I did kind of realize that I'm more of an artist than a scientist, artist and manager than a scientist. So.
I do want to note that the Duke basketball team is not the only program here at Duke that has a strong recruiting. They've had amazing Frank to come here and practical skills and advance his knowledge in that way. Let's go back to Go Good. Yeah. What is your vision for Go Good? What is your hope for it to become in 5 or 10 years?
So really it's, again, there's no trusted go-to source of information about places, about destinations, description, overviews of countries and states and cities and parks and cultural heritage sites. So part of the vision, that the foundation of it is really that just a pure travel guide, atlas and travel guide that you can explore, and learn about places. We're using all these different sources, go to Google and Wikipedia and, tourism websites and things, but a lot of that content is really highly promoted, not necessarily trustworthy, and it's inconsistent. So the foundation is just to have that source of authoritative, curated, well-written information, descriptions of places and guides to places, with great pictures, etc. But then overlaid on that would be the sustainable businesses. So the hotels and the restaurants and the shops and the tour operators, but only those that are sustainable. So, I want this to support these businesses, these that are really investing in sustainability. So the criteria is for them to be interesting, authentic, and sustainable, and only that. So there won't be any hotels that are, mass tourism and are unsustainable. And so for the thoughtful travelers who that's what they're looking for, interesting, authentic, and sustainable, this is your go-to source. And so we really want to reward the destinations that are investing in being sustainable and the businesses. So that's really the vision for it.
It's such a great cause, and we wish you luck with everything that you do in the future with that. Everyone, Frank Biasi. Please give us a quick moment while we adjust for the Q&A session. Yeah. We'd like to invite Shannon, Catherine, and Frank back to the stage for the Q&A. And we're going to open it up to you guys. We have microphones here. So if you want to ask a question where it says push, you're going to want to hit that push and you can talk directly into the mic. So we can get started with questions. Brendan?
Yeah. Thank you all very much for being here. This was really exciting. So as kind of a scientist with a traditional science background, I don't think I've had a lot of training in storytelling. And so as someone who's going into PhD, working in Southeast Asia, would really like to be able to do some of that. So in particular, Shannon, you mentioned getting a project to do an animated film. I have dreams of trying to get an animated film based on some of my PhD work. So any advice on developing that skill set for storytelling, and then like finding grant money to pay for those things when you're doing a PhD in kind of science.
Yeah, great question. Well, I would have said apply, right? So the kind of, what do they call they're not the Young Explorer grants anymore, but through National Geographic. That's right. They're the early career grants. So that they really do support one bucket of that is the storytelling grants, so you can get one specifically for figuring out, doing a really interesting project like that, which sounds amazing. However, I think there's some changes now with how the grants are working, so I'm not entirely sure how accessible they will be moving forward. But there's a lot of storytelling grants out there. National Geographic is such a, globally recognized for scientific storytelling, but I think it's become more universally understood that this is a really important aspect of doing science. And more scientists are investing in doing this kind of the science communication. So there are a lot more grants out there, and I wish I could come up with some names. Maybe either of you know specific names for grants to apply to, but I'm happy to talk to anyone that this is an interest of, because I do have a whole database of these grants. So I'm happy to point you all to those, and very much encourage you to apply for those, because I do think there's more funding out there than ever for this type of work. And then as far as the skill sets, I think, you're at a place here where you could potentially take, I don't know if you have the time, but some classes or work with student groups that are focused on science communication. There's lots of different platforms that try to train and provide these skills, but you have to really dedicate the time to reserve time and figure out that balance with your science. Yeah, so I don't know what's that, or if you two have anything now.
Shannon's the expert, certainly as a PhD turned science communicator. Well, no, you're fully a research professor too, so you're all of the things. But I like to talk to people who have done that before. So I'm thinking back to not only Shannon, but there's a couple people who got PhDs and then recognized that they wanted to do science communication instead. And so they founded their own companies, and they got written into NSF grants where Jonathan Lassos, who's now at WashU at the Earth Collaborative, I think it's called, in St. Louis, wrote them into his NSFs to do the science communication of the research that he was going to be doing. So I think talking to people who have done it before, one of the people did get an early career, it was then called Young Explorer Grants, but that's not the only funding source. And I don't know enough about the turn from PhD to science communication fully. But I would recommend, and I can put you in touch with the people that I'm thinking about if you want to just exchange information, so you can hear from the source, like a Shannon, who's actually, and these people that I'm thinking of are now running the company and hiring people to do more science communication. They're being employed by WWF, by TNC to tell their stories too. So I think there's such an appetite, because most people, as Gabriel and I talked about, are not scientists, right? Like bringing in the non-scientific community and making compelling science communication that appeals to audiences that are not just in the ivory tower or not just within the discipline is critical. And so I think that there's a real appetite, and I think it's talking to the people who have done it to get some more ideas in addition to Shannon for where you can go, where you can get funded, and how you can get started.
Yeah, and I just thought something too, that's absolutely right. And sorry, Frank, if you wanted to add something, but as they both mentioned earlier about collaborating, you also don't have to be everything. And it's been hard for me to learn that. So I always want to do it myself, and I get all excited about all these various avenues. But at the end of the day, it's really can be productive to collaborate with people who already have those skills, can focus on that animation, and along the way you learn from them. But you're not having to be the one driving it. So I highly recommend that too, just making connections with folks that have those skills and are excited about, your work and sharing it too.
Great, thanks so much. I'll follow up with both of you.
Way into this, getting going. Okay. Hi, I'm Victor. Thanks so much for coming. I'm actually graduated from the public policy school, so coming to crunch this event. And I was just curious, I'd love to hear from each of you, just your perspective on maybe just some policy impacts on conservation in your work, or what are sustainable travel, like what you see as like helping or hurting. And maybe as like an example, I was taking a course on climate policy at the federal level, and there's been a lot of talk about, a need for a huge build out of infrastructure for clean energy, but that's of course going to have a lot of disruption on land and water if you're installing wind turbines, offshore. There are conservationists who are like, that's a problem, and some people say in response like, well, in 10 years, if we don't put this in there, it's not going to matter. The climate change is going to is going to destroy the habitat regardless. So just love to hear just your thoughts on, I guess, the policy landscape, I guess, in terms of conservation.
Yeah, I mean, now I'm really focused on the policies related to tourism and travel and economic incentives for where, well, in the context of, say, destination marketing, government funding on just a destination who it markets to bring travelers to the place. You get places that they're marketing to source markets that are halfway around the world, so rather than domestically. So they could be marketing to just their neighboring countries or domestically to, rather than the long haul traffic. So just doing that, bringing more travelers and kind of discouraging the long haul flights versus the domestic is one really simple set of policies that can happen, and incentives for that, as well as incentives for where and regulation zoning for where development happens, the type of development, tourism development, hotels, and incentives for small businesses versus large corporations and that sort of thing. So those are some of the big policy issues in the tourism space right now that have real direct impact on environmental impacts and things.
So I'm not an expert in U.S. environmental policy, but I actually am teaching a course now that really examines a lot of our environmental history in the U.S. And I post hypotheticals to my class often about this, like all of the local sort of environmental destruction that has to occur for this so-called greater good, right? Or thinking about it as a greater good of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So like the precious metal mining, right? Like you're talking about with EV batteries, or I think what I always come back to is it brings me back to the bigger picture of there's always going to be a cost, right, to our energy consumption, whether it's renewable or not, that there's just cost involved. And we need to really think about as a culture, as a country, we're not going to be able to continue on our endless use of energy. And, we need to have a multi-pronged approach to reducing our energy use while we're transitioning right to renewables. And I think that I think we've made a lot of strides in the US, especially from California. There's been a lot of push for, making everything electric. And I think it is a step in the right direction, but yeah, there needs to be a lot more thought put into the local destruction that's going to continue to happen to extract those resources.
Hi, okay. Hi, my name's Ella. I'm an undergraduate student. Just expanding on the question I asked earlier, was it difficult to build a competent skill set of both like qualitative or quantitative researcher? Like, what's the balance between experiential learning versus traditional learning in the classroom setting, especially when it comes to issues like this around that seem just more like community-based learning?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think it's really important to like get your quantitative chops, so to speak, and practice those quantitative skills. But I do feel like they're privileged in the sciences. And I kind of have like beef about it. Because there's a whole lot of qualitative methods that really just means, for those not familiar with that terminology, qualitative is just words, right? It's using language as your data, words as your data, as opposed to numbers. And I think it's been shown, quantitative approach has been shown to be very valuable, of course, over time, but I think there's more understanding of how the qualitative methods really open up a whole other level of understanding and a richness to understanding the context of an area where you're working, interlinkages, right, between the social and ecological systems, the cultural values around those. And I think it's important to try to, especially at your undergraduate level, to get, a good mix of those and get a sense of what resonates with you. And make sure you always remember that they all have value and they all have a place to be used. I don't know if that answered for you. If there was another part of the question. The experiential learning. Yeah, and balancing that. Like, I'm always trying to think about how to we're always talking about the environment in my classes, but we're sitting in a dark room looking at the, slides, and it just feels so counterintuitive. So I think, it's so important to get that hands-on experience as well. And I always try to think about how to do that in my classes.
Thank you for being here today. I've heard a lot about this since we gave roommates for the last few months, so it's really good seeing out of that. But assuming you guys are all American, so you've all worked internationally, so it's two-pronged. As an American working in the international environmental field, what's been your biggest advantage as an American, and also what's been the best thing to keep in mind, and be cognizant of while working internationally?
I think the biggest advantage, you said the biggest advantage and the biggest lesson.
Yes.
Yeah, so certainly the lesson is humility. That's leading with humility in the work is just critical. It's critical domestically, but especially moving abroad. One of the best things I was taught by a mentor advisor for covert is every time you go abroad, you're an ambassador for your country. I was for many people, probably the only American they'll ever meet in Northern Vietnam, the community where I live. So it was essential that how I showed up was with humility, was with kindness, was with respect, was listening. It's come up a lot today, empathy. You're one person, but you might be somebody's only person that they meet from America. So it's always stuck with me. And then the biggest, privilege is the resources, being a Duke student abroad. I had just privilege, and I was very lucky, and I feel very lucky. But it's something I always remember with this part.
Yeah, definitely echo all of that stuff. It's it changed after the Trump years. Actually, I think that being an American, people started looking at us a little bit differently, I think, and it really affected people's perception of America and Americans, and how we thought you were different type of people. So I think, it's been good being able to try to express a different personality and different set of values than what I think people around the world saw from the Trump years. So that's been, I think, a challenge, but also an opportunity in the travels that I've made since then, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, just like you both said, Catherine, you talked about a bit, the responsibility. I really feel the weight of that responsibility because there's been so much damage done historically with, this colonial approach to research, and I think it's becoming more well known as parachute research, as parachute science, where you go in, extract your data, leave, and the local community doesn't benefit at all or is even harmed. And even in my own work, I went in with the mindset of I want this to be participatory. I want it to be, community-led, with all these expectations, that were not necessarily aligned with the communities I worked with. So I would have done my work differently in a lot of ways in retrospect. And I think, but it's also interesting because I went in with the perspective of, I want to learn from you all, which is a form of extraction, right, with the knowledge, but I want to work with you in a way that is you're teaching me as well, and I'm not coming in like, oh, we need to do things this way. But then the expectation when I arrived was, hey, help us out. Like, what is your scientific skill? What are your scientific skills? You know, you're from Stanford. Like, you should be bringing us some like real concrete, deliverables here, essentially. And I was kind of taken aback. So I was like, well, I just want to learn with you. And, we're doing participatory stuff. I don't actually know how to like restore these reefs locally, and I had to pivot and really think about like, wait, what are like some other things that I can bring that are beneficial? So there's just all these, there's such a difference just when you're coming into a context you don't fully understand. And I never will, in the way that people who are from there do. So it's humility, it's being adaptable, but really taking that responsibility serious, because I think we've done so much damage collectively, even with really good intentions, and just being aware of that and always trying to filter your work through that lens. Yeah.
So, Alex.
Thank you all so much for being here. As someone who doesn't have a conservation background, or maybe for those of us in the room who don't work on conservation on a daily basis, what is one thing we can take away from this conversation, from your work, from your experiences, to weave conservation and sustainability into our everyday lives?
Looking around, I'm sure there's like 99 other people that'd be better could answer this question in this room who are at the next school. I think it's really trite. It sounds trite, but you matter. Like your daily activities matter. It's one person, but one person can talk to their community, can talk to their workplace, can talk to their their city. Systemic change has to happen. We know that the issues are so large that it has. But the way you show up, what you do matters, because other people see it, and like so to me, like having that integrity of like, I am actually going to walk the walk, I think it's important. And it might just be optics in some way, but I actually think it's more than that. So it can't just stop with one person, but yeah, like the daily decisions of how you got here, when you're going home, what you eat, all these things, they just matter. And that's what I take away. We can all do our part, even though we all know it has to be more collective.
Yeah, I think really just educate yourself about what our impact is. So many ways we have, our impact on water and energy and air quality. We all, and then collectively have such an impact. And so I think being aware of that and doing each of our small parts to minimize that, our usage and everywhere. And one of the things I wanted to mention too, again, going back to the travel, is just behavior. One of the behavioral research has shown that when we travel, we behave and act differently when we're traveling and on vacation, and when we're at home, we release control, and we're suddenly like, oh, we're using reusable water bottles. At home, we're just all about the plastic water bottles, and so I think try to really be consistent, be aware of all that, and then if you can craft a career and have a North Star that you want your career and your focus and the time you spend in this life to try to make an impact, beyond your consumer impact that can really have a scalable impact, then do it. We need more of us to be doing that, and less of us going into just finance and making money, and let's just all try to make a much bigger impact than we're making.
Yeah, I echo all of those things. I'd say the last thing I'd add is just being willing to question your own assumptions all the time. And in doing that, being willing to have dialogues and, collaborations with potentially people who think very differently from yourself. I think that's something that through my PhD program at Stanford, I felt like we were all kind of patting each other on the back, like, good work, good work. We all think the same way, we have the same, views. And that's simplifying a little bit, but I've seen the most productive work done in these really creative collaborations that are not obvious. And I think you just want to keep expanding your understanding of what that can look like. And just always so I paraphrase that with question your assumptions. I always tell myself that. I'm always trying to remind myself that. And then you can keep expanding and being expansive about what conservation looks like.
Thank you guys so much. We're running out of time. Our speakers will be sticking around after the event to answer any additional questions, but I do want to leave off with one final question. And when I asked you guys who is Shannon, who is Frank, who is Catherine, you guys emphasized that you guys are a mother, father, family member. Where do they fit into all this, and how are they part of your work and who you are as a person?
Led with your
Well, yeah, I mean, that is, more important to me than making an impact in the world. I hate to say, that this is my core responsibility as a human, is to, raise good kids. And so yeah, I think that's, you have to do that. And in order to do that, you have to not be 100% dedicated to your work, and you've got to give them the time and treat them like they're your main projects in the world, in life. And, up until they're 18, my kids just turned 18, actually goes beyond that. So yeah, just, spend the time, don't just focus on career, and make sure you teach them all the things that you care about, and listen to them, have empathy for them, just like with your project people and all that.
I think I'm maybe the newest parent. I have a 3-year-old boy and then one on the way. So another boy. So I'm still really trying to figure that out, because I've been so focused professionally for so long, a little later in life, starting the family side of things, and really trying to still figure out how to balance that. And especially as a woman, I've talked with a lot of my female professional counterparts who we take on a lot. It's just inherent to take on a lot more of that, especially in the early years, the time, the I don't want to say burden, but the time with the child raising. So it's been amazing. It's been, I think, the highest highs and sometimes the lowest lows, when it's the terrible twos and the three-nager now is what we have. Yeah, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. So yeah, it's, but I've been trying to think more deliberately about how to bring those two worlds together, because I think, they shouldn't be so separate, I think, and I still don't know what that looks like exactly, but I'm still, trying to blend those two worlds more.
Well, thank you guys so much. This was such a thrill to plan, and you guys have been amazing to work with, and you guys are such genuine people. It's been such an honor to have you guys come back to the Nicholas School and present your work and your careers. So thank you guys so much for coming and being a part of this. And that wraps it up here. We have some desserts. We have some live music on the rooftop. If nobody's been to the rooftop at all, definitely check it out. There's a garden up there. It looks really nice. And our speakers will stick around and answer any additional questions that you guys may have. Thank you all so much for coming.